The village of Greenwood was known far and wide for its beauty and peace. Green trees covered the land, and a wide river curved gently around its edge. Birds sang in the mornings, children laughed in the afternoons, and elders told stories under the great Iroko tree at night. Greenwood was not a rich village, but the people lived happily because they shared everything. No one ever went hungry in Greenwood, for the custom of sharing food was the heart of their life. When a woman cooked a pot of soup, she sent a child to call her neighbor. When a man roasted yam, he broke it into pieces for everyone sitting nearby. Even the poorest farmer, who harvested only a handful of corn, would take some to his neighbor before eating. This way, everyone had something, and no one was left out. The people of Greenwood believed that food had a spirit, and it blessed those who shared it. But among them lived one woman who did not follow this way. Her name was Mary. She had come to Greenwood many years ago, after her parents died, and she lived alone in a compound at the edge of the village. Mary was hardworking. Her farm was neat, her pots always full, and her kitchen smelled of delicious stews. But she did not call anyone to eat with her. Each night, as the smoke of evening meals rose from every compound, Mary would close her door, sit alone, and eat in silence. The people noticed, and they shook their heads. Greenwood was a place where food brought people together, but Mary's house was always closed. Mary's habit became a subject of whispers among the villagers. Children would run past her compound, giggling and saying, "There she is, the woman who eats alone." Elders frowned when they saw her eating by herself during festivals. Even when the drummers played and food was shared in baskets, Mary would keep her own calabash by her side and eat quietly. At first, the people thought she was shy, or maybe still grieving her parents. They tried to invite her to join them. "Mary," they would say, "come and eat with us. There is enough soup and yam for everyone." She would smile politely but shake her head. "Thank you, but I prefer to eat at home." And so she returned to her house each night, carrying her food in covered bowls. It soon became clear that Mary did not only refuse food from others, but she also refused to give. If a child knocked at her door, asking for a little soup, she would tell them gently, "Come another time, I have nothing today." But the smell of fresh stew would still hang in the air. Neighbors who asked for help in times of hunger were sent away with empty hands. Slowly, the village grew tired of asking. They decided to leave her in her ways. Still, Greenwood had its customs. The elders often reminded her, "Mary, food is not just for the stomach. Food is for the spirit. When you share, you invite blessings. When you eat alone, you close your door to both people and spirits." But Mary never listened. She worked hard, she cooked well, and she believed that since she earned her food, it belonged to her alone. Every week, Greenwood held its market under the big mango trees by the river. Women spread mats on the ground and filled them with tomatoes, peppers, yams, beans, and smoked fish. The air buzzed with laughter, bargaining, and gossip. It was in the market that the story of Mary was most often told. "Have you noticed?" one woman would whisper, "Mary never buys extra. She buys just enough for herself." Another would reply, "Yes, and she never offers anyone a taste when she cooks. I once asked for pepper, and she told me she had none. Yet I saw her grinding pepper later that day." The older women, who believed strongly in the customs of Greenwood, were troubled. One of them, Martha, spoke loudly one market day, "When a person eats alone, she eats with shadows. When food is not shared, it grows bitter in the spirit world." Mary does not know that her habits will one day bring sorrow. The women nodded and sighed. They agreed that it was not natural for anyone to close their door every night while others shared joy and laughter. Some of the younger ones laughed at the warnings. "Perhaps Mary just wants peace," they said. "What harm can come from eating alone?" But the elders shook their heads. "A pot of soup can never be eaten by one person forever," they answered. One day, the pot will answer back. Mary, of course, had these warnings. People were not shy to speak in Greenwood, and words traveled quickly. But she waved them off. People talk too much, she said to herself. I work hard for my food. Why must I share it if I do not want to? Nothing will happen. She carried her basket of food home and shut her door once again. Mary's compound was not like others in Greenwood. While most compounds rang with children's laughter, with the sound of mortars pounding yam and women calling each other across the fence, Mary's place was silent. She swept it neatly every morning, but no child came to play there. No neighbor leaned across her wall to chat. No smell of shared cooking drifted into another's home. At night, the silence of her compound seemed heavier. The rest of Greenwood glowed with laughter, songs, and drums, but Mary's house was closed. She sat on her wooden stool, eating from her calabash in the quiet. Sometimes the shadows of the firelight moved across her walls, as if the silence itself had come alive. But Mary never noticed. She thought she was free, eating alone without disturbance. Still, there were times when she felt the weight of her solitude. She watched the children run past her gate and wished, for a brief moment, that someone would sit with her. But pride kept her from changing her ways. I am fine, she told herself. I need no one. Yet the emptiness of her compound grew deeper with each passing season. One evening, a traveler arrived in Greenwood. His name was John, a tired man with dust on his feet and hunger in his eyes. He knocked on the first compound and was welcomed with water. He knocked on another and was given roasted yam. He was surprised by the generosity of Greenwood, for not all villages were so kind. When John reached Mary's compound, he saw smoke rising and smelled delicious too. His stomach growled, and he knocked. Mary opened the door, surprised to see a stranger. He greeted politely, "Good evening, woman of the house. I am a traveler, hungry and weary. Could you spare me a little food before I continue my journey?" Mary frowned. She thought of a pot of soup, enough for herself but not much more. She hesitated. Then she shook her head. "I am sorry. I have no food to spare tonight." She closed the door before John could speak again. John sighed and moved on. He soon found food at another house, where he was welcomed warmly. But as he ate, he said quietly to his host, "That woman at the edge of the village has a full pot, yet she says she has nothing. Does she not know that food belongs to everyone?" His words spread quickly, adding to the story of Mary. The people shook their heads. One day, they said again, "Her food will answer her." The oldest woman in Greenwood was named Grace. Her hair was white like cotton, and her back was bent with age, but her eyes still shone brightly with wisdom. Everyone respected her, for she had seen more seasons than anyone else in the village. Grace often sat under the great Iroko tree, where young and old came to hear her counsel. One evening, after hearing the traveler's story about Mary, Grace called the villagers together. "Children of Greenwood," she said, "I have watched this woman for many years. She eats alone every night. She gives nothing to children, nothing to neighbors, nothing even to strangers. Do you know what that means?" The villagers shook their heads. Grace leaned forward and whispered, "It means she is feeding only herself, but she is also feeding something she cannot see." The people grew silent. Grace explained further, "Food has spirit. When you eat alone, the spirit of the food grows lonely. It begins to hunger not only for your mouth but for your life. That is why we share. We feed each other, and the food blesses us. But Mary feeds only herself. If she does not change, the food will one day eat her." The villagers gasped. Some laughed nervously, thinking Grace was simply telling an old tale to frighten children. But others felt her words deep in their hearts. They knew the old woman did not speak without reason. From that day, many avoided Mary's compound, fearing that her food carried unseen anger. Every year, Greenwood held the festival of sharing. It was a time when the entire village cooked together, spreading food across mats in the square. People danced, sang, and exchanged meals, making sure no one was left out. The air was rich with the smell of roasted yam, palm oil, beans, and fish. Drums beat through the night, calling even the ancestors to witness the joy. This year's festival was brighter than ever. Children carried bowls from one compound to another. Men roasted meat on open fires. Women stirred large pots, adding extra portions so that there would be more to share. But as always, Mary kept to herself. She cooked a small pot of stew and rice in her compound and refused to come out. When the drummers passed by her gate, they called, "Mary, join us. Bring your food and eat with the village." But Mary shook her head. "I am fine here. I prefer to eat alone." She sat on her stool and ate while the laughter and music from the village square drifted over her walls. For a moment, she felt a pang of loneliness. But she quickly pushed it away, telling herself she needed no one. That night, as the festival drums echoed, Mary's compound felt colder than usual. The shadows of her fire stretched long and twisted. The food in her bowl seemed heavier, and when she swallowed, she thought she heard a faint whisper from the pot. She brushed it off as her imagination, but the whisper returned in her dreams. After the festival, whispers about Mary grew louder. Children pointed at her compound, calling her the woman who eats alone. Women shook their heads when they passed her in the market. Men laughed quietly, saying she was too proud to live like the rest of Greenwood. Mary heard it all, and her heart grew heavy with anger. "Why can't they leave me alone?" she muttered as she pounded yam one evening. "I work hard, I plant my farm, I buy my food. Why must I give it away just to please them? I owe no one anything." Her anger boiled as fiercely as the stew on her fire. That night, when a small boy knocked at her door asking for a piece of yam, Mary shouted, "Go away. This food is mine, not yours." The boy ran off crying, and Mary returned to her meal, muttering bitterly. But as she ate, the stew tasted strange. The salt seemed too sharp, the oil too heavy. For the first time, Mary did not enjoy her food. She pushed the bowl away and sat in silence. The shadows in her compound seemed to move again, stretching across the walls. She tried not to look at them, but in the corner of her eye, she thought she saw them gather near her pot. Her anger cooled into unease, but her pride kept her from changing. One night, as Mary sat down to eat, something strange happened. She lifted her spoon to taste the stew, and she heard a faint voice. Startled, she looked around, but no one was there. The voice came again, low and heavy, "Mary. Mary." Her hands shook. "Who is there?" she whispered. The voice answered, "We are here. We are your food. You eat us every day, but you never share us. We are growing hungry too. Hungry for more than your mouth." Mary gasped and dropped her spoon. The pot on the fire bubbled louder than usual, though the fire beneath it was small. The stew hissed as though alive. She backed away, trembling. "This cannot be real," she told herself. "I am just tired." She covered the pot quickly and tried to forget what she had heard. But that night, she could not sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she dreamed of hands reaching out of her pot, grabbing at her. She woke with a start, sweating and shaking. For the first time, Mary was truly afraid. Mary's fear followed her into her dreams. One night, she dreamed she was standing by the great river that curved around Greenwood. The water was dark and restless, and voices rose from its depths. They whispered her name, echoing like drums in the deep. She looked down and saw the river filled not with water, but with soup, red soup, thick and boiling. Pieces of yam and fish floated on the surface, but they moved like living creatures. Suddenly, the food rose up, forming faces that stared at her. "Mary," they chanted, "why do you eat alone? Why do you feed only yourself? We are hungry for you now." Terrified, Mary tried to run, but her feet sank into the thick soup. The boiling heat burned her legs, and she screamed. Just as the food reached up to pull her under, she woke with a cry, her body covered in sweat. The dream felt so real that she checked her pot in the kitchen. It sat there quietly, but when she lifted the lid, she thought she saw the stew shift slightly, as if it had been waiting. Mary woke up the next morning determined to ignore her strange dream. "Dreams are only shadows of the night," she told herself. She decided to cook again, thinking that good food would calm her mind. She fetched yam, beans, and palm oil and set the fire. The pot bubbled steadily, filling the compound with a sweet aroma. When the food was ready, she sat down to eat. She served herself a plate of yam and stew, but when she looked back at the pot, it was still full, just as full as before. Confused, she scooped again, filling another plate. Yet when she looked again, the pot was brimming, as if untouched. Her hands trembled. She ate one plate, then another, trying to reduce the food. But no matter how much she ate, the pot remained full. The food seemed endless, multiplying instead of decreasing. At first, Mary thought it was a blessing. "Perhaps my hard work has brought me favor," she said. But as she forced herself to eat more, her stomach grew heavy, and still the pot overflowed. Finally, she covered the pot and pushed it aside. That night, she dreamed again of the river of soup, boiling and calling her name. She began to wonder if the old woman Grace had been right all along. Days passed, and Mary noticed something new. Each time she sat to eat, she was no longer alone. A shadow appeared on the opposite stool, shaped like a person but dark and faceless. At first, she thought it was only the firelight playing tricks, but soon she realized the shadow moved when she moved. It lifted a spoon when she lifted hers. It leaned forward when she leaned forward. One night, she dropped her spoon in fear, and the shadow dropped its spoon too. The sound of the wooden spoons hitting the bowls echoed together, making her shiver. She stood up and ran to her bed, refusing to finish her meal. But when she awoke the next morning, the bowl was empty, as if someone, or something, had eaten from it. Mary's fear grew heavier. She remembered Grace's words, "When a person eats alone, she eats with shadows." Now she understood. The shadow had become her only companion, and it was feeding on her food. Worse still, it seemed to grow stronger each day, while she grew weaker. One evening, Mary tried something different. Instead of cooking, she decided to go hungry. She thought, "If I do not cook, the shadow will not come." But when night fell, her compound grew colder than ever. The silence pressed on her chest like a heavy weight. Suddenly, she heard the sound of spoons clattering, though her pot was empty. She looked around in terror and saw the shadow sitting at her table, eating from an invisible bowl. Its movements were sharp, as though angry that she had given it nothing real. The sound of its eating filled the compound, louder than drums, though there was no food. Mary screamed and ran into her hut, shutting the door. But the sound followed her, echoing inside her ears. That night, she could not sleep. The shadow was no longer just at her table, it was inside her dreams, sitting close, whispering her name. By now, the villagers had begun to notice strange things about Mary's compound. At night, when the moon was high, they heard spoons clattering and bowls scraping, even though Mary was alone. Some claimed they saw two figures sitting by her fire, one of them dark and faceless. Children no longer dared to run past her house, and even the market women lowered their voices when speaking about her. "Her food is no longer food," said Martha, the elder woman. "It has turned into something else." Others whispered, "She has caught spirits with her selfishness." Even those who once defended her now kept their distance. No one knocked on her door anymore, not even in hunger. Mary, however, grew thinner. Her eyes sank deep into her face, and her steps became slow. She ate more than ever before, yet she was never satisfied. The shadow seemed to eat with her, taking her strength with every spoonful. She began to realize that she had brought this upon herself, but it was too late to turn back. One moonlit night, the sound of drums filled Greenwood. It was not festival time, nor did any wedding take place. The villagers were puzzled, for the drums came not from human hands but from the direction of Mary's compound. The beats were deep and haunting, shaking the ground underfoot. The elders gathered quickly, listening with grave faces. Grace, the old woman, shook her head. "The ancestors are speaking," she said. "They are warning us. Mary has offended the spirit of food, and now her house has become a drum for shadows." The villagers dared not go near her gate. But inside, Mary sat trembling as the drums echoed in her ears. Her pot boiled on its own, though no fire burned beneath it. The stew bubbled and hissed, sending strange smells into the night. And with each drumbeat, the shadow at her table grew taller, its form clearer. She could now see hands, long and bony, reaching for her food. One evening, Mary prepared her meal as usual. But this time, when she sat to eat, she found not one shadow but many. Her table was surrounded by faceless figures, each holding a spoon. They stared at her in silence, waiting. Terrified, Mary tried to leave, but the shadows blocked her way. They pointed at the food, demanding she serve them. With shaking hands, she placed bowls of stew before them. To her horror, the bowls lifted by themselves, and the shadows began to eat noisily. The sound of their chewing filled the compound, drowning out the night insects. Mary sat frozen, unable to move. When she tried to eat her own portion, one shadow snatched it from her hand. She realized the food was no longer hers, it belonged to them. That night, she cried, but no tears could stop the unseen feast that had begun in her house. At last, the day of judgment came. Mary cooked her meal, trying to ignore the strange happenings. But when she lifted the lid of her pot, the food rose up. The yam pieces twisted like living arms, the stew bubbled into faces, and the fish flapped as though alive. The pot shook violently, and before Mary could cover it, the food spilled out, crawling across the floor. It reached for her feet, climbing up her legs. She screamed and tried to push it away, but it clung to her skin, burning hot and heavy. The stew spread like fire, and the yam pieces forced themselves into her mouth. She choked, unable to stop them. Her screams echoed through Greenwood, sending shivers into the hearts of those nearby. But no one dared to enter her compound. They only listened as the sounds of struggle filled the air, then silence fell. The next morning, the villagers gathered at Mary's gate. No smoke rose from her kitchen, no sound came from her yard. At last, the elders decided to enter. What they found made their blood run cold. Mary's table was set with bowls, but the food inside had hardened into stone-like lumps. Her pot was overturned, its bottom blackened though no fire had burned. Mary herself was gone. Only her stool remained, lying on its side. On the ground, strange marks were etched into the earth, as if many spoons had scraped it. The villagers whispered in fear. Some said the food had eaten her. Others said the shadows had carried her away. No one knew for certain, but one thing was clear, Mary was never seen again. From that day on, Mary's compound remained empty. No one moved in, for the villagers believed it was cursed. The table where she once ate stood abandoned, gathering dust and cobwebs. The children who dared to peek inside swore they still heard the sound of spoons clattering at night. Over time, the story of Mary spread beyond Greenwood. Travelers carried it to other villages, warning people about the danger of eating alone. Wherever the tale was told, people shook their heads in sorrow. She had enough to share, they said, but she chose to keep it all. Now even her life has been swallowed. The elders of Greenwood declared her compound a place of teaching. They told children, "Look at this empty table. Let it remind you that food is a gift, not a possession. To eat alone is to invite loneliness. To share is to invite blessings." Years passed, and Greenwood remained a village of sharing. No one forgot Mary's story. At every festival, the elders retold it under the iroko tree, making sure the young ones understood. They ended with the same words: "Food has spirit. When you share, it blesses you. When you keep it only for yourself, it turns against you." The children grew up knowing that even a small piece of yam must be shared. Travelers who came hungry were always welcomed, for the villagers remembered how Mary had turned a stranger away. Every household kept an extra bowl at the ready, saying, "This may be for a neighbor, or for the spirits who watch us." And so, Greenwood thrived in peace and plenty. The river sang gently, the drums beat with joy, and no one ever ate alone again. For deep in their hearts, they carried the story of the woman who ate alone, until one day, the food ate her.